So I got a chance to sit down and talk to my good friend, George Hound. Now, George is a holistic health and fitness coach, but what George also is a retired professional wrestler from Canada. Now, George has agreed to come out of his retirement to square up against Mercurio in an upcoming Lucha Libre event right here in Merida, Yucatan, Mexico. In this episode of the No Pain Podcast, we talk about George's experience wrestling in Canada. We talk about the different styles of wrestling in Canada versus Mexico. And then we talk about some of the pains that George has sustained throughout his career. We talk about how he's overcome them and how he's preparing for his upcoming match. Have a listen. I hope you enjoy. Hola amigos, Coach Darwin here. I'm a physical therapist, and this is another episode of the No Pain Podcast, a podcast where I like to bring on guests and talk about injuries that they've sustained and how they've overcome them. And hopefully it's empowering, educational, and entertaining for you. So today I've got a very interesting guest with us today. His name is George Hound. George is a holistic health and fitness coach, as well as a professional wrestler.
Yes.
Thanks for being here.
Darwin, thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure.
So I have to get right into this and say, how does a retired wrestler from Canada come to Mexico and get back in the ring?
Yeah, my family and I moved here in 2022. We went to go see a Lucha Libre show, and my wife never saw me wrestle when I was professionally wrestling in Canada. And at the show, she was just like reacting in such a positive way, and like she loved it. And I'm just there, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool. Like my wife likes this. She never got to see me wrestle. It's kind of, I don't know, something happened in that moment, and I'm like, I'm gonna go take a walk. And something like kind of overtook my body, or I don't know, I was inspired to just walk around. I was able to track who the promoter was, just because I know what their job usually looks like. And I said hi, introduced myself. Started asking questions about their show, how they're building it. And then he asked me, he's like, who are you? Like, how do you know so much about wrestling? And I just said, oh, I was a pro wrestler. I'm retired now. And long story short, he's like, come train with us. And then 6 months later, I'm on a show this Sunday.
Wow. Okay, yeah, so just for the audience, real quick, the show is this Sunday, which is May 26th.
Yep.
At 12:30.
12:30 at the Poliforum Zamna in Merida, Mexico.
And I'll put all that information down below in the description. So let's rewind. Tell me about your career as a wrestler in Canada.
Yeah, what can I tell you? It was very interesting. It's very different than in Mexico. In Canada, it's a little cutthroat. And it's the same in the United States. If you're starting off wrestling, you're in the independent scene, it's probably really hard to find a good trainer in the industry. I was lucky. I got a really good trainer in the Montreal area. And then, we can focus on so many things. A lot of positive things happen. I got to work with some great wrestlers. Kevin Owens was in the WWE right now, was somebody that I got to work with. Sylvain Grenier was also in the WWE, Jay Lethal. But then there were a lot of injuries that happened. And I must say, one of the things that now, as a health coach who specializes more in kinesiology, the training regimen and what these kids go through both in Canada and in Mexico, it's just kind of encouraging pain to be infused in their life. So lots of good stuff, some bad stuff. We could go wherever you want to go.
Well, coincidentally, my family was also at that same Lucha Libre show in October, I want to say.
Yeah.
And I was blown away, fascinated. I grew up watching the WWF, which is exactly how old I am before it became WWE. And I was just fascinated by the differences. It just felt like so much more passion. It just very different in the Mexican style of wrestling.
Very different.
Can you speak to that a little bit? And how are you preparing for that change?
Yeah, so, culture-wise, it's very different too. In the States and in Canada, you basically have to be accepted by a school, and then you kind of have to negotiate with each individual promoter to wrestle there. And if they like you, they hire you, you get paid. And there is no insurance, there's no blood tests, there's none of that. It's just very, cutthroat. You're going to work for me, you do a show. If you're good, you'll come back. If you're not good, you don't come back. In Mexico, it's crazy different. the state government governs whether you get a license or not to allow you to wrestle on a show. So me being here, they're like, you can't just wrestle for us. It was so funny. They're like, where's your license from Canada? I'm like, I don't have one. They're like, you're lying. You're not a wrestler. I'm like, no, we don't need it. And it took some convincing, but here I had to do blood tests, which is good. You know, like you want to make sure you're healthy and you don't have any contagious stuff in your blood. And they wanted to see that you can actually perform. So they had to, a panel had to kind of investigate and see, like, can this person actually do justice to the world of Lucha Libre? And from a wrestling perspective, you know, it's really interesting what's happening in America, where the fans have gotten a little smarter, almost a little jaded sometimes, and you almost have to push the envelope more and more. You almost have to literally hurt each other just enough to make it look real, but not so much that you can't do it again in the future. Whereas in Mexico, the culture just, it's almost like a religion. They love their lucha libres. They believe in the high flying and the storytelling. So it's two different mentalities.
That's interesting. In a land that there's a significant lack of regulations on so many different parts, that they actually regulate the lucha libre. It just goes to show how passionate and how important this is.
Right. And where their priorities are.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah. It's such a fun event. It's really just to be there and immerse yourself in it from a fan's perspective. I can't imagine the thrill actually being in the ring. Tell me about the masks, because as somebody who's not really down with all the techniques and everything, tell me about how the masks play a role.
Yeah, it's very important to them. So first of all, my Spanish is not great, still learning. And it's been interesting just kind of navigating with some of these wrestlers, because some of them don't speak any English. And the ones that know the most about the masks don't speak any English. But I've been asking a lot about it, because I didn't want to just rely on what they say on the internet. I wanted to hear it from them themselves. For them, it's important to be able to kind of embody the character that they're in the ring. And a lot of times they'll kind of channel in like the Aztec warrior, the Mayan warrior, for the guy I'm fighting is called Mercurio. So Mercury is actually a Greek god, or a Roman god that he's channeling in. And there's something special about also concealing your identity. So when they do press conferences, you'll never see their regular face. They're going to keep the mask on. And it's also part of that culture, Lucha Libre. Like when the mask is on, there's a certain reverence and respect that you have to pay to the wrestlers. It's automatic. Right.
And it seems like part of the battle inside the ring is to pull off your opponent's mask.
Yes. So the rudo, who's the bad guy in Lucha Libre, will often try to disrespect the técnico, which is the good guy in the ring. And if you could get that mask on and show the face of the luchador, it's very it's not something that a luchador wants to happen. They don't they don't like having that mask taken off. It hurts their something inside. I don't know if it's their pride. I'm not a luchador, so I can't speak for it, but it seems to be like something in their pride. It's almost like Spider-Man being unmasked and the world getting to see Peter Parker. They don't want that to happen.
It feels like it's the biggest insult, the worst thing that could happen.
An insult. That's the word. That's the word. Yeah.
And will you be wearing a mask?
No, I haven't earned the right to wear a mask yet, not with them. But there's already talk that if this match is good, and not so much what the outcome of the match will be, but how the crowd reacts to me.
Sure.
Because right now it's kind of funny. They don't believe I'm a wrestler.
They don't believe you're a wrestler.
They're like, this guy's a fake. He's never wrestled before. Part of the problem is I have a new name. So coming to this new world, I actually said, please don't call me when I was back home. I'm retired. Let's start something fresh. So we have a press conference tomorrow, and the media has a problem with me because they're saying we're Google searching Canadian Hansen. That's what they call me. And he doesn't exist. You guys are trying to pull one all over us. Yeah. So after this match, hopefully they'll be convinced that I was a wrestler, that I'm good at it. And if I earn the respect of not so much the fans, but the wrestlers, all the guys backstage, I can wear a mask if I want to. Some wrestlers don't wear the mask.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. What is something that the general public who may not be ardent fans misunderstand about the sport of professional wrestling?
Yeah, I guess the word sport might be something that confuses them because for me, it's more of an artistic expression slash stunt performance by these athletes, because they are athletes, but they're athletes that are also at the same time acting. And a lot of people think that the whole thing is scripted, but it's not. You know, you might have a storyline that you're given by the booker. The booker is the person who writes the script or has control of the show. So they'll usually tell you, okay, you guys are match 3, and we want you to start like that. This is the theme, and we want kind of this finish. You and your opponent will then go and maybe plan out certain moves, a certain pace of the match. But at the end of the day, the fans control the match. So if what we've planned is boring,
interesting, we
got to tweak it. I have to, or he or my opponent has to say to me, it's like, okay, let's change this up. We got to do this. We got to wake them up. And if you're eating up, if the fans are eating up what we're doing, then we might take it back a notch and be like, well, let's not kill ourselves. Let's just keep doing the easy stuff. So there's a lot of improvisation. It's like a tango dance. Okay. You usually have a lead, and you usually have the other wrestler who follows, but there's a lot of improvisation based on the feeling, the mood, the environment, the audience. Right. So that's something different.
So the entire match is not scripted move per move, because that's actually something that I thought.
It can't be. It can't be. There's too many variables. In fact, you can tell which matches are completely scripted. It's usually done by new wrestlers, and it looks very robotic, and it almost looks fake. You could be like, oh, like he's waiting for him, but the veterans. I've wrestled with guys that were like, what's your finisher? I told them what my finisher is. Like, okay, cool. We'll figure it out on the ring. And I'm like, oh
wow. Well, what is your finisher?
So I used to call it the end of days. I might give it a new name here. But basically, I would jump from the top turnbuckle, and as you're standing, my knees would drive the back of your head into the canvas.
So, that is the end of days.
End of days. We'll see it this Sunday. I'm hoping to pull it off against my opponent.
Fantastic. How would we call that? Ultima Diaz.
Yeah.
Diaz de Ultima.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, so since we are on the No Pain podcast, what I want to do is go over an injury that you have sustained with wrestling. And I imagine as a professional wrestler, you have a litany of injuries that we could go over. Maybe something that has happened most recently, if you had anything leading up to this show?
Yes. So, it was very fun. I was very hesitant to kind of start training again after I retired because I had a serious neck injury and a lower back injury. And sure enough, in my second training here, I hurt my lower back. So the ring wasn't that great. You usually have a layer on the bottom of the ring that's usually metal or the wood. And on top of that, you have something that would give you a little more give, mats or whatever. And the mat moved out of the way, just the way the training happened. And I got not a very aggressive move, but I landed on my coccyx, my tailbone.
So if anybody has had a tailbone injury or a coccyx sprain, you'll know just exactly how debilitating it can be. So I'll be shooting a separate video coming up very soon that will describe the anatomy of the coccyx, different injuries, and then how to recover from those injuries.
Right in between the mats, my body was crooked and I hit the hard surface, and it didn't feel right. Like right away, I stopped training that day, and it started being like a pain in my tailbone that eventually went to my lower back, and then I started getting some sciatica symptoms all in the course of a week after that.
How long ago was this?
This was 3 months ago.
Okay.
So that happened very early, and I kind of contacted the promoter, and I'm like, I don't know if I could do this match. Like I started getting worried. I'm like, am I going to get problems again? And it was very interesting to see their reaction of the wrestlers. They were like, well, just pop some diclofenac, go to the pharmacy, get some painkillers, and work through it. Right. And I was like, no, I'm going to give this a week or two. Let's see how I'm feeling. Let's rest completely. Luckily, I got back to normal. I did some mobilization stuff that ended up working. And after that, it's been pretty easy up until the last training that I did. The guy I'm fighting and I kind of got into like this little... Yeah, so we both ended up going to the same training, and we were kind of feeling each other out, just doing like some improvisation. It wasn't even planned. And he put me in this leg submission, hyperextended this leg, and I felt something. And I'm like, oh, man. And usually my right knee is the bad knee. Now my left one has been, I feel like it's fine, but I hyperextended a little bit. And again, this week I'm taking it off. I'm doing some stuff in the gym, just letting it heal. And I feel like I'm going to be okay.
Okay, smart. And I think your approach is very different with your, as a health and fitness coach, you bring a different perspective to your injuries. And I do want to circle back to that part of you and your work. But I also wanted you mentioned something about popping the pain pills, which I know is just kind of a cultural thing with professional sports in general. Back in my old days when I had the physical therapy practice, we worked with some professional wrestlers, and I know that that is just part of the culture and how to get better, and very well documented in the WWE of some of these wrestlers like Hulk Hogan and Jake the Snake Roberts, these guys that really became addicted.
Kurt Angle, just as much.
That's right. And very dangerous situation, mixing alcohol and the addiction to the pain pills and everything. But you've managed to steer away from that.
They scare the crap out of me, actually. I remember I was getting ready to go to Florida to try out for the WWE. I was getting ready to go. So we did a little tour in Canada where we wrestled in Quebec. We wrestled in Ontario, primarily Toronto. We also did a little bit of New York. And what was interesting is I went backstage. After most shows, what happens is you party.
Sure.
You go and party somewhere, you get some food, always alcohol. And I'm looking around and I'm like, let's see what everyone's doing. And I'm like, okay, if there's alcohol involved and that's all this person's doing, they're doing a lot of alcohol. We're not talking about 1 or 2 glasses. And then the ones that weren't doing alcohol, there was, I hope you don't mind me saying, they were doing cocaine, stimulants, because you kind of have to keep the body going when naturally your body wants you to stop after being on the road for so long. And I would say more than half the guys were popping some sort of painkiller. And I was lucky enough to have a background in pharmacy. I studied, my master's was in pharmacology, and I worked in a pharmacy for a decade translating. It was a Greek pharmacy, so the pharmacist wasn't Greek, but all the clients were Greek. So I was there next to the pharmacist, translating all the Greek customers' information to the pharmacist and vice versa. So I got to learn a lot about the pharmacy world and just knowing what the side effects of these painkillers were, how controlled they were for a reason. It was one of the reasons why I retired at that point. I was like, I don't want to go into this.
Yeah, smart. And I think speak to the fact that these are real athletes, and despite people thinking it's fake and the outcomes are contrived or made up, speak to the damage that the body sustains through training and through the road work. Yeah,
so there's I feel like when you have these university sports, even like football that's quite aggressive, and basketball and hockey, the training has evolved over the years, right? But in pro wrestling, it's still, I can't speak for the WWE, but if you're like in the indie leagues, it's old school. It's like do it over and over again and bump. And a bump is when you just literally drop yourself against the mat and smash your back against the ring. And people are going to be like, oh, it's padded. But let me tell you, we've had new wrestlers come to a training. And the first thing we ask them to do is, you're going to bump today, and we're going to see if you're made for this. And like, no problem. And I'd say like 1 out of every 5 guys will bump, and after that first training, they'll be like, I'm not coming back, because we're not made to just bounce off the floor and have our head like our brain jiggling in our skull. It's not a normal thing to do in the WWE. It's like 200 days a year. If you're an indie guy, you might do it like twice a week, which adds up because you're still trying to train and be in a certain shape. So there's an old school mentality there in the pro wrestling world, in Canada, in the US, and even more so in Mexico. So in Mexico, they're wrestling, I got to give it to these guys. They're wrestling 5 days a week in the ring, and they're not holding back. I was the oldest one, I think, in the ring training with these guys. I would only go once or twice a week. They got a little upset. They're like, do you think you're too good for this? And I explained to them, like, my body can't do that. And they're like, oh, like the old guy. But I'm looking at them and I'm like, I'm outperforming some of you guys, most of you guys. My cardio is better and I'm not in pain. And most of these young guys in their 20s were like bandaging their elbows, wearing these things over their knees. You could see that they couldn't quite stretch without wincing in pain. So they're suffering.
Yeah, body takes a pounding, even though it's padded. In most of the area is padded, at least. The body, really isn't meant for those for the amount of damage that you guys do to each other. Now, tell me then about your fitness coaching work. I know you and I have talked, and you have a very interesting perspective, I think, and more cerebral perspective. Tell me about what that looks like for you.
Yeah, well, it could be a long story. I'll try to make it really short. But after all my injuries in wrestling, I ended up getting an MRI and diagnosed with like spinal arthritis. The neurologist was like, I was 25 at the time when they told me all this. He's like, you can never go in the gym again. Like, what does that mean? He's like, yeah, you know when you do shoulder presses with dumbbells, like you can't do that. You've got like your nerves in your cervical column are compressed. That's why you can't feel your right hand. And my lower back was a mess. So they didn't give me a solution to be able to go back to training. I was really upset. And maybe it's not the job of a neurologist, but I basically went on this journey of figuring out how can I get back to at least the level of health that I had. Forget about wrestling. So I ended up quitting my master's in pharmacology, becoming a personal trainer. I'm like, probably a good place to start.
Yeah.
Realizing that the fitness industry was a mess as well. Like I worked for a gym where, people that couldn't lift their arm next to their ear were doing these kettlebell clean and presses and just hurting their shoulder even more. So I'm like, okay, the fitness industry didn't figure it out. And, through luck of the draw, I just kind of kept my eyes open, started seeing who's doing well, who's not, who's rehabilitative, who isn't, which rehabilitative guy is getting results. And, through a journey of 10 years in the fitness industry, I kind of had to get more into exercise therapy, realized how nutrition was important to kind of put in there and let the body become more anabolic, not catabolic. We live in a society where we're constantly encouraging breakdown of the body, like go, work. Well, what about rest, sleep, eat properly so your body can recover. I have this new philosophy that I'm following right now for this wrestling gig that I'm doing. It's like, I'd rather be undertrained than overtrained. Because when you're undertrained, at least you can push a little harder in the event and kind of make up for a little bit of that lack of maybe being in the ring. But the guy that's overwhelmed and overtrained, he has no more gas in the tank to give. So my philosophy right now is awareness. I try to give awareness to my clients, not just physically with their body, but also I've learned emotionally how that ties into like how you're behaving and nutritionally as well.
Fantastic. Well, we're excited about the match coming up on Sunday.
I'm excited too.
Good luck to you. Let's tell them one more time again, the details.
It's May 26th. It's going to be at the Poliforum Zamna at 12:30. And I'll be in the ring. It's going to be Canada versus Mexico. Canadian Handsome against Mercurio.
Let's get it. George, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Darrell.